Muy buenas tardes con
Good
todos.
afternoon to all. Welcome. My name is Analí Briceño, and today I have the honor to be with you in this event called Challenges of Displacement or Displacement to Development. These are the challenges and opportunities for migrants from Venezuela. We are very thankful for you being here with us. The organizers of this event are Encuentros Servicios Jesuita a Migrantes, Migrant Jesuit Service, the Center for Global Development, and Refugees International. We are part of the initiative Let Them Work, and our organizations have been handling events of promotion and education for the migrants and refugees in the context of Peru. Today, we're going to develop this event from displacement to development, and we're going to focus on a conversation about integration, socioeconomic integration of Venezuelans coming into the countries. And we're going to offer some solutions in the context of the pandemic that we're facing. The panelists will be analyzing the dynamics of the people that are coming to our countries as refugees and migrants, and the responses that we can be promoting as solutions that will also generate opportunities, mutual opportunities for Venezuela and Peru. We have very important speakers that are here to talk to us about this topic and of the challenges that we have been facing as a country. First of all, we have to welcome and we have to thank Dr. Roxana. She's a superintendent of migration, Roxana del Águila Tuesta. We also have with us Marta Guerrero. She's the program associate for Refugees International. And she is going to talk to us about the main findings of a research they've been handling. And we also have a very important panel where we're going to discuss from their experience some of the strategies to adequately face this Venezuelan migration situation that we're facing. We have several representatives. We have Feline Freyer, Associate Professor of the University of the Pacific University. We also have Federico Agusti, representative of ACNUR in Peru. And he will talk about the role of international collaboration. And we will have Ruth Luque Ibarra. She's coordinator of the Human Mobility Group of the Civil Society. The humanitarian crisis that Venezuela is facing is considered one of the main or most important crises of forced displacement in the region. We have more than 5 million people living outside of Venezuela, and Peru has become the second country that is welcoming these people into their territory. This has placed us in a very difficult scenario, but it's also a scenario of hope. And we want to understand the opportunities that are part of this situation, not only public institution, academic institution, social institution, and our society as a whole. And today, our organizations have understood the need to provide you all with information on this topic. What are the challenges? What are the needs? What are the opportunities that we all must face in the context of human mobility? And this situation has intensified because of COVID-19 pandemic. Without further ado, and to start the welcome for this event, I want to give Helen Dempster the opportunity to talk to us. She is the Adjunct Director and Senior Associate of Politics from the Center of Global Development.
Many thanks, and it's
Muchas
lovely to see you all here. I'd like to thank all of our panelists and all of the participants dialing in today for joining this very important conversation. And I wanted to start by setting the scene. So the vast majority of the world's 29 million refugees and forced migrants live in low and middle income countries. In general, these countries restrict the rights of these people to work, move, and thrive. People are stuck, often for 5 or 10 years, without the ability to make a living for themselves and their families. These policies also mean less economic productivity for the host country, fewer tax revenues, less social integration, and lower incomes and living standards for both the migrants themselves and their host populations. Of course, many people, both in these host communities and policymakers, are worried about the impacts of allowing these migrants to work, move, and thrive. They are concerned about whether these policies will affect the wages of their citizens, whether it will be a pull factor for future movements of migrants, and whether it will affect their ability to be able to access international financing. So to try and unpick these pros and cons, the Center for Global Development and Refugees International have embarked on an initiative which we call Let Them Work. Let me quickly pull up a slide. So as you can see from this slide, our initiative has 3 pillars. The first is our global research and learning pillar. This pillar aims to use new data to answer some of the questions that I outlined above. Does granting refugees the right to work reduce host community support for those refugees, or reduce the amount of humanitarian financing a country can receive? Is the right to work or freedom of movement more important? With such research, we hope we can answer some of these big questions and help guide the discussion at international and national levels. The second is our country level analysis pillar. We are working in 4 countries, Colombia, Peru, Kenya, and Ethiopia, to understand the barriers that refugees and migrants face engaging in the labor market, the impacts of these barriers on these populations and their host communities, and the factors that have led to such policy positions. Today, Martha will present the results of our work in Peru. We have also published work in Colombia, along with our work in East Africa being released next year. Finally, the third pillar is our work on private sector engagement. Businesses operating in refugee hosting countries are important actors. They can hire refugees, support refugee-owned businesses by providing financing and integrating them in their supply chains, and promote the positive benefits of engaging with these migrant populations. But often businesses are left out of policy discussions or don't have the information they need to make the business case for working with migrant populations. We hope to provide these businesses with this information so that they can push for progress. This whole initiative is funded by the IKEA Foundation and Western Union Foundation, and we hope to generate a lot of interesting analysis and insights on the impact of expanding economic integration for refugees and forced migrants around the world. So I hope this has been a useful overview of our project and that it's provided you with this global context for the presentation you will hear today. If you want more information about the initiative, please do get in contact with myself or Martha after this call, or go on to both of our websites, which has much more information about this as well. I very much look forward to the discussion today, and many thanks to you all for being here.
Muchísimas gracias, Helen. Gracias por tu explicación, por la
Thank you,
bienvenida.
Helen. Thank you for the welcome and all of your explanations. And as you just mentioned, one of the reasons that has us all together in this meeting is the presentation of the findings of this research. In order to have this, we're going to invite Marta Guerrero. She's the associate, of Refugee International, and she is going to present the findings of this research. How can Peru transform the migration in a shared growth? Thank you so much, Martha. And we have 15 minutes for your presentation. We will be present. I would like to thank everyone in the panel to be with us here in a discussion that is very important, which is the economic inclusion of Venezuelans in Peru. And thank you to Encuentros, where we are collaborating and sharing all of the experiences that they have shared with us and all of the initiatives in the country. I want to share my screen. I have a presentation of the findings of this research. And a little bit of what we analyzed were the barriers. We wanted to know what the barriers were in place that were making it difficult for Venezuelans to integrate into the society and see what the gaps are for their inclusion, as well as what are the opportunities that we have. And so, first of all, as you mentioned, Annalie, at the beginning of this presentation, we have a displacement of Venezuelans that is the second largest in the world, and Peru is one of the countries that is welcoming these people. We're getting more than 1 million Venezuelans in Peru. Aside from that, Peru is also the country that welcomes asylum applicants. We have more than 496,000 people. However, the migrant and refugees from Venezuela in Peru encounter growing barriers, economic and legal, and this is an obstacle to their access to formal jobs, to stable jobs, and to satisfy their needs and practice their rights in the country. And what are these barriers? The study that we embarked upon allowed us to identify 8 barriers. The first one is that there are very limited opportunities to regularization or to be a formal citizen of the country. So if we don't have that, they cannot get a job. So economic inclusion is going to be very limited. The second obstacle that we identified were the obstacles that asylum applicants are finding. Many times, employers are not accepting what the Peruvian government is offering these applicants. The third are difficulties to make valid the credentials that they bring with them from their country, and the government is working very hard with this, but professional colleges and also the cost involved in this is a barrier, and it's an obstacle for many Venezuelans to get their accreditation accepted. The fourth point is that Peru right now has a law that limits employers to just hire 20% of foreigners. So that means that employers have a limit on how many people from Venezuela they can hire. And of course, they're worried about breaking the law. The fifth obstacle is that there are 30% of taxes when people do not live in the country farther than 183 days. So they're paying a larger amount of taxes, and that is applicable to Venezuelans as they want to formalize their situation in their first days. Well, this makes it more difficult. The sixth point is discrimination and exploitation. As you know, xenophobia is growing in Peru, and 70% or more than 60% think that Venezuelans are going into the country to take their jobs away and to make things more difficult, which is not true. And when Venezuelans are looking for jobs, they're discriminated because of their nationality, and they are being exploited also when they do get jobs. The seventh are obstacles that are very specific to women. One is the access to services, for example, childcare. And this situation limits a lot of the women that are coming from Venezuela and are household heads to be able to enter the job market. And they are also vulnerable due to xenophobia. And the eighth are limits to entrepreneurship. The process of opening a business, it's very difficult. And when they're not, Venezuelans do not understand the process in Peru, it's very much more difficult. We have a limitation of access to information, and government entities need to be able to explain this to Venezuelans migrants so that they can open businesses. So all of these barriers have made it more difficult that Venezuelans, just before COVID-19, would integrate into the economy, especially in the issue of informality. They are working at jobs that do not align with their capabilities, and many of the Venezuelans, many of the jobs that Venezuelans find are places where they are exploited or when they get less of a salary than they're due to. This issue of informality is part of Peru also, where 72% are not in a formal arrangement in the country, even if they're capable of working. And before COVID, and with all of these barriers that they are facing, and that would determine the way in which they could integrate into the economic sector, we could see a positive fiscal impact in the Peruvian economy from this Venezuelan displacement. This because Venezuelans are actors in the economy. They pay taxes, they buy, and that led us to a growth in the PIB of 0.3%. And contrary to the public perception, unemployment did not grow. For example, in Lima, where a lot of Venezuelans are residing, we did not see unemployment grow. And we did see that a salary for young people that are in informal service and commerce sectors went down. And that is because Venezuelans are forced to work in jobs that are beneath their capability. So how do we see that gap, that inclusion gap? What we found in this research is that Venezuelan are earning 35% less than Peruvians, but they are earning 24% less. And that gap is even more important and larger for Venezuelans that are very educated, where they're earning 71% less. And when they are not that educated, the difference between Peruvians and Venezuelans is more or less the same. But as we go higher in the educational levels, you will find that the gap is larger. And these gaps are even more important and larger when we're talking about women, where Venezuelan women earn 23% less than Peruvian women and 49% less than Peruvian men. How has COVID affected everything in the work scenario? Peru has had to face the problem with COVID. There's been a lot of impact from this disease. Some sectors have been impacted more than others. restaurants, hotels, manufacturing, services. So many of the services that were closed when the pandemic started, and we found that 71% of Venezuelans are working in these sectors that are so highly impacted. And that is in relation to Peruvian, which is only 56%. And when we're talking about Venezuelan women, we find 78% of them working in highly impacted sectors. They have a lot of jobs that are in contact in public. And so those positions have closed and they have been left without a job. They have gone back to Venezuela. They have issues of food security, and they are in a situation of vulnerability. However, we see a potential economic impact and a possibility of improving the situation for both Venezuelan and Peruvians. That would help us improve the quality of life of Venezuelans in Peru, but it will also have an impact in the economy and development in the country. A higher integration would increase the Peruvian PIB. The Global Bank thinks that it would take Peru $3.3 billion of investment to be able to find or reach the level. 43% of businesses in Peru have a difficulty in filling out vacancies. We have a deficit of doctors, teachers, and psychologists, and that could be overcome with Venezuelan professionals. Also, including Venezuelans in the economic scenario would lead to contributions to the pension system. We should be helping people that are in the informal economy to join the formal economy. The integration of migrants and refugees from Venezuela has the potential to generate benefits for Peruvians and Venezuelans and promote a shared development that should be key for the recovery after the pandemic. We have certain recommendations dealing with this. One of them is to talk about these barriers and promote the integration of Venezuelans to Peru. I'm very happy to have the superintendent with us, and she will be able to explain the system even more completely, to have the opportunity of development for both Peruvians and Venezuelans. And thank you very much. We thank you, Marta, to be punctual. And we want to see, and for sharing that investigation for us. I am going to move from my moderator position. This is reflecting what you're sharing is things that are visible even before in other countries. And this will generate growth in the host countries that are accepting and welcoming these migrants. Of course, we have to have the legal aspects and the civil rights aspects figured out. This has to be part of what we're doing.
Gracias, Marta. Siguiendo también con lo establecido.
Thank you very much, Marta. Following what it says in our program, I would like to ask Dr. Rosana del Águila, the immigration superintendent, who has had the great gesture of being with us today, to talk to us at this event. Go ahead. Good afternoon to the organizers. Thank you for inviting us to participate in this event. We are always looking to help and support the arrival of Venezuelan citizens. I want to emphasize the temporary permanency permit that was designed at the National Superintendency. And thanks to that, after 3 temporary permits, we had of about 20,000 that were in Peru, to 1.2 million that we have. And of those, 788,788 have been controlled. That means that they have entered the country through the migratory controls. And we would look at those who have entered the country illegally next, but out of those 788,788 citizens that arrived in our country, they received the form 475, even though those who were in the country could get it. We have issued the first PTP, and with this norm, it was worked out in 2016. In January of 2017, it became a supreme decree that provided exceptional uh, protections for allowing documentation of these citizens. And this is important because it generated the expectation that our country didn't have experience with immigration, but we received that amount of people. And out of those, of course, we've had difficulties regarding some crimes that were committed, felonies that have generated fear in the population. But when I refer to official data and basic information, I'm not mentioning that there was a survey to 10 or 20% of the population. We have this information from, we have 2.2 billion data points from Venezuelan citizens, and we hand this information to all the sectors, the executive and other institutions, international institutions, just like our friend Federico Agusti, who uh, very quickly we determined that the temporary permanency permit is not just any permit, it's an administrative resource, and with it, we have the support of ADUN. We started this action of the documentation without any additional monies asked for. With the budget we already had, we were able to document this volume of people 24 hours a day at the national level offices without the without any extra income for that work for the directed personnel. Any massive immigration impacts society. When we're in a society where there haven't been migratory and integration policies worked out, where there is no uh, knowledge of the requirement of these uh, professionals that were looking for a job, with that, they have brought over their talents, but there's also a great volume of minors, unaccompanied minors, minors with children that are sick or gravely sick, and the elderly too. So if we take into account the amount of citizens that have arrived in our country in less than a year, the impact is always going to be highlighted. But us at the superintendency and with the data that the Venezuelans fill in our system, because we do it online, they respond to 66 questions. And among those are what their job is, their studies, and their experience. And thanks to that, we have been able to hand information of 19,000 health professionals. And I want to emphasize that the population that has arrived, 53.7% are male and the rest are female. And this population, 61% are between 20 and 39 years old. So It's a potential population to integrate our labor market, and 63 out of every 100 Venezuelans, male Venezuelans that arrive are between 20 and 39 years old, and there's a similar proportion among females. 58 out of every 100 are between 20 and 39 years old, and they're professionals. This has meant that we have gathered vital information. We have professionals, professors. I want you to know that we have not only implemented these measures that are not popular. We know that determining regularization is going to impact things. Why? Because we have extreme poverty in our country already. And by documenting these people, we're allowing them access to our public services, health, the labor market, education. But the Peruvian state has provided this support from the superintendency. The income of the immigrants are between 1,000 and 1,900 soles, and they themselves have declared in the systems, and they have declared those who work less than 8 hours a day. We also have information about the education situation due to how close or how far they live from schools, and that has meant that hasn't affected their ability to enroll in school. The ones that enroll in school are considered vulnerable, but we're giving them classes even if they're irregular or not. And their parents have access too. So we are facing a situation. I wanted to show you this. This is a project that was finished. It's a social demographic information that took into account the information available up to the closing of 2020. We have provided information to the World Bank, ADNUR, OIM, and UNICEF so that they can collaborate with us. But also we have to be sincere. Collaboration has been minimal if we're comparing it to other countries. This collaboration has been to document them, but we need to take into account policies and plans that can help with the insertion of Venezuelans into Peruvian society, but that doesn't mean that we aren't advancing. I wanted to mention that since January 16, we have issued a rule under Supreme Decree 010, which is the regularization of irregulars in our country, that we calculate are 1.1 million from all nationalities, not just Venezuelans. So out of 101 countries that have been registering from January 16 up to now, we have almost 300,000 pre-registered people. So we're registering almost 7,000 illegal immigrants a day. And we document them online, and we take biometric data and their social demographic aspects. And this data was shared with the presidency of the council that assists these people to help with their situation, to vaccinate them without taking into account their migratory status, and for this to help everyone. So these data that we have in our institution are official. They're not studies, they're not statistical studies, so they reflect a work that can help all of those organizations that want to study and evaluate this, but above all, contribute, because we cannot keep uh, studying things just so. We need to have a multi-sectorial work, public and private, and international organizations that allows us to help with these challenges with the irregular transit of Venezuelans and their migration. It has been impressive. And I say it not because I have data points, but because we ourselves have been at the border assuming this risk and carrying these children. So the situation has been calamitous. In October of 2019, in one day, we received more than 16,000 Venezuelans, and 6,000 of them were minors. The informal work market is a reality not just for foreigners, but for Peruvians. There's a lot of informality, and we are waiting for organizations to have plans to help Peruvians and foreigners get into the legal job market. And I mentioned the profile of the professionals and the advantages that this migratory study has for us. It's like gold for us because we know that if we have, if we do joint work where we can identify, as we have identified, more than 800,000 Venezuelan citizens, we have their address, their phone number, their education level, their experience, their profession. We have valuable information, and it's important for us to have this collaboration because we have a high workload and classifying the candidates for being refugees. There are almost 500,000, so they're basically in a limbo right now. As Migraciones, we are an operative entity. We can differentiate between these are the ones that came in and these are the refugees because we know that it's not true. There's a humanitarian crisis of hunger and desperation. So Migraciones has been coordinating with the Exterior Ministry, and we're receiving more than 200,000 names. And out of the 300,000 that are pre-registered, 120,000 have indicated that when we finish the rule that allows for regularization, we would have advanced at 80%. And for July, we hope to have everyone documented. But that's just opening the door. And that's not the only thing we need to do. It's not about opening the door and handing them a document. It's like getting your diploma from university and not knowing what to do with it. We need to work with the Ministry of Education, with the professional schools, because there's a need here. And sometimes this autonomy from the schools provided by the Constitution seems that goes over or is above a human need in a sanitary crisis, and that can't be accepted. So we are working with the aspects that were presented because the cruelty of the deaths that you have spoken about or you have seen are not just the attacks on Venezuelans, and no violence can be accepted. So we are working to educate not just the Peruvians, but the foreigners that we're all brothers and sisters, and this is a time to help each other, especially when there's a humanitarian crisis. What are the opportunities that we consider that formalization, that migratory formalization that we worked on from 2017 through 2020, and with this Supreme Decree, it was decreed in October, thank God, and Colombia did it on March 1st of this year, but uh, once it it's enacted next week, this more than 300,000 pre-registered ones are going to be documented immediately. So in 6 months, we hope to finish the documentation of all these people that have these the temporary permanency permits have moved on to a foreigner's ID. It's not just authorization. it's that they're Peruvian residents. And that is important. That detail is important because besides being able to access all services, many of them have Peruvian children because they had their children here. So we are learning from massive migration because our country has 3.5 million Peruvians outside of the country. So it's unacceptable for people not to understand the urgency and the need and a humanitarian crisis of a human being that suffers and is looking for a place to eat. So that is our objective for 2021. We have done more than 123 actions. We have had 55 actions, 12, 55 talks, and we are giving citizenship to more than 70,000 vulnerable people. It doesn't matter if they're regular or not. We have given them that so that they can have access to health services. So we have a lot of challenges.
More than 400,000 applications from foreign citizens, aside from the one that I already mentioned. So we have selected some rules that will allow people to become regular citizens. We're working with the communication media since 2016, not just with the country, but also with international organizations that can help us. And I also would like to tell you that every public policy with dealing with frontiers has an impact internationally. It's very important to say this. Peru is the second country to receive Venezuelans, but why? Because we're not talking about barriers, we're talking about tools. We've been open to receiving them. But however, other countries have migration policies that close the frontiers to all of these people that need a place where they can find hope and they can continue to live. So in less than 1 year, we've gone from 20,000 to 1 million citizens. And this is a situation that has an impact, but we have a commitment that goes beyond sectors. We want to work and continue to work in these issues, on these issues, so that we can understand how to deal with this forced migration, which means that it's an emergency situation where people are leaving their countries in desperation. We want to have Venezuelans integrated to our country, and we actually have Venezuelans as part of our agency and organization, because a public agency has to work to provide quality of life for all. That's our objective. We hope that on March 23, we can go on and register more than 70,000 people as citizens of our country. And we also want to give them that opportunity, not just to Venezuelans, but from other countries that are becoming part of ours, foreigners from all around the world. So I believe that this is an opportunity, and we appreciate this chance to share this with you. This is not easy. It's not easy to look this from outside, and it's not easy to look from within and try to get solutions for this. And we are asking you, we are begging you for help from all of the organizations that are in the world and working internationally. We want to really give these people the opportunity to integrate into our country in a dignified manner, even if later on they can go back to their country. We want them to develop their capabilities. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you, Doctora Roxana, for all of the information that you were able to share with us. The message is clear, and we share that message also as organizations that are working dealing with this topic. And we want every agency, every government authority to help us with this situation that you so aptly described. We want to regularize and formalize as many people as we can who are foreigners in our country. And we know that little by little, we are supporting, and this is part of that effort. Discussing this topic is part of this effort, because we know, as you do, that we need to have more policies for migratory integration, because in the end, that is going to help us to integrate the population in a better way. And as you mentioned, this is not easy. Now we have the experience and we're researching and finding out more on how to work this. And before ending, I want to tell you that all of the information that you have, that we have many digital data. You can access that through the web page. It's information that is official, and you can use it for your work. And I invite you, in the name of the agency I direct, and I always invite Federico, but I extend the invitation for all of you to come with us, to visit us and see the population that is here. We could really do a great job, and we could also help our government officials to understand the process and to perform this migration update in a better place. To continue, we are going to now, before going on, we want to remind everyone in any of the channels that we are broadcasting in that you can write your questions in the chat, and at the end of the presentation, all the speakers will be able to answer your questions so that we can have a very rich and complete discussion. And now we're going on to the next part. We're going to have a discussion among our panelists. We're very grateful for your participation today, and you are all going to give us your point of view on this issue. So we're going to start from the state's view with Sonia Cavalli. She's part of the staff of Defensoría de Derechos Humanos, the defense of civil rights and people with disabilities. And she is studying her master's in the university where she got her primary degree. We're ready for you. Thank you so much, Annalie. Good afternoon to all of you. It's a pleasure to be with you this afternoon to talk about this socioeconomic integration of Venezuelans in Peru, the benefits and possible solutions in the context of the pandemic. I didn't want to forget to mention, after listening to the superintendent, that we are with her in this challenge to achieve this integration of foreigners into our country, and that we are behind our recommendation of strengthening a migratory policy that takes into account that the needs of these people should be taken into account in all other policies, social, economic, etc. I'm going to share with you my presentation. Can you see my presentation yet?
No, en este momento.
A ver.
One moment, please.
Ahora. Ok. Ay, creo que si lo pongo así. A ver, un momento, por favor. Sí.
Just a moment, please.
Ya. Gracias. Mi disertación de hoy tiene como base
My presentation today has as a base the report that is called Challenges and Opportunities for Socioeconomic Immigration Integration of Migrant Population and Refugees in Peru. And it was a research done through our organization and using the benchmarks that were vital and relevant at the moment of the research. Before the pandemic, we identified at least 3 elements that represent barriers for the socioeconomic integration of the migrant and refugee population from Venezuela and coincide with what Marta showed us earlier. One of the most important things are the difficulties in accessing a regular migratory status, the documents that they need in order to be in the country. This have become barriers for regular, normal entry. The lack of mechanisms found themselves that unable to formalize their migratory situation. We also found difficulties to find the ID or carnet as refugees, the documents that are required and the time that it takes are some of the most important barriers. Even though migratory regulation is essential for integration, the public policy in Peru did not offer tools or mechanisms that would work for this population in order to become citizens or regular citizens. Before the pandemic, it was possible to access the system, but there were still problems in terms of the implementation of a new process with accepting documents in the frontier with Ecuador. And of course, many of the applications were not accepted. And of course, the system was overworked because of so many submissions and applications. We also identified the PTP and the carnet for refugee were not recognized as valid for the exercise of the rights, even though in the government it was supposed to be. And they find this a barrier to exercise their rights, financial rights, civil rights, socioeconomic rights. These barriers affect not only their rights, but also their possibilities for development and for contributing and integrating into our society. There is a barrier, a legal barrier, as Marta mentioned before, because there's a lot of taxes imposed on these citizens and there's a lot of legal barriers in integrating and formalizing their status as migrants. And of course, as Marta mentioned also, the validation of their credentials. This situation that we have just mentioned has led to having citizens in the informal economic scenario where they are being exploited and earn less than what they should earn. As the superintendent mentioned, this is a problem that we have to solve. A problem because of the lack of resources and lack of salaries presents a different problem also because they cannot find decent living spaces. We also found problems with education because of the irregular practices and because of the problems with validating credentials. And of course, this is having an impact in the development of children that are coming to our country. We also have a growth. We also have an added pressure from listening to discrimination and stereotypes, and these are promoted in media that are looking to criminalize migration. In this slide, you can see the measures that the government took that do not respond to all of the needs of our migrant brothers and sisters. Some of the ones that we can mention are that in October 2020, as the superintendent mentioned, we had a new law that created a new procedure to formalize migrants. Even if we have not been able to implement everything completely, this has allowed us to and has helped from even before the pandemics. The measures taken under this law are exceptional, and once it is fully implemented, will allow people to have a permanency or residency permit. In terms of refugees, from June until the end of 2020, we had a virtual platform where the applications could be presented to ask for asylum. Right now, that page is under maintenance. And another very important measure is to authorize temporary work. And this is a document that is provided to people that are seeking asylum and refuge. And then we have the special COVID service.
Facilitates the insertion of health professionals that are refugees to fight against COVID. We can also highlight the inscription on the rule through the web as a measure to facilitate the entry into work, even though there's a problem. The list of activities permitted for this kind of inscription doesn't include all the necessary ones to provide first aid services. So besides these measures for the integration of refugees and social migrants, during the pandemic, we have seen some worrisome aspects, in lack of inclusion of foreigners on the help from the state. There was a tendency to delegate support to the international cooperation, discriminatory discourse against Venezuelans, and lack of safeguards for the right of refugees and the maintenance of the platform. A crucial right to achieve the socioeconomic integration of the foreign population is the right to work, which has been affected by the economic crisis generated by COVID-19. There are two central aspects: arbitrary firings due to the lack of mechanisms of denouncing these work abuses. The informal work of these activities have been suspended due to the social distancing and a loss of income for the migrants, and this has affected their quality of life to achieve the basic needs of feeding themselves and taking care of their health and having a job. There's no guarantee for nationals and foreigners to have the guarantee of achieving this in Peru. There's a lot of conditions where a lot of people live close together, and most of the 88% of the complaints against people taken out of their homes, 88% of them came from Venezuelans. Or for there to be some shelters for them to stay while the investigation is running. Sonia, I'm sorry, time is running out. If you can wrap up in a minute. Thank you. The conclusions were mentioned, and there's some recommendations that are tied. I'm going to highlight those that are tied to the integration. We reiterate the need to strengthen the institutional capacity of the state to implement and complete immigration policy that tends to the needs of this population, and that is going to be held by what the superintendent said, working on a new law for hiring foreigners, implementing immigration programs, which has been developed, and working on a national policy against discrimination of foreigners. Thank you very much, Sonia, for all the work you have been developing from as an organization of civil society. Has been very valuable, all the work that you've done. We're going to go to our next presenter or participant today. We are joined by the investigative professor of the Universidad del Pacífico, Feline Freire from the Universidad del Pacífico. She's a researcher and she researches the immigration laws in Latin America and the migration and Venezuelan migration. And she has
medios académicos y de comunicación, nacionales e internacionales. Ha brindado asesoría a diversas instituciones y organizaciones como Amnistía Internacional, la CICR, el BID, OIM, ACNUR, el Banco Mundial y la Unión Europea. Además es asesora de
the European Union.
investigación y publicación sobre migración de la OIM. Feline, bienvenida. Sabemos de toda tu trayectoria.
Go ahead.
We know of your trajectory, and we also know all that you have contributed and gave us data and new points of view on all of this issue and topic of migration. And we want to know from your point of view and from the point of view of academia, what are the best things that have worked in our public policy in Peru. Thank you so much. Go ahead. Thank you so much. 10 minutes, or do you want me to talk a little bit less?
10 minutes, or do you want me to speak
Anali?
a little bit less? Can you hear me?
Sí, te escuchamos.
Yes, we can hear you.
Well, I'll switch to English then. I'll take advantage of the opportunity to speak in English today. Many thanks to the organizers, Anali, the other speakers. I think a lot of very important issues have already been raised by the excellent presentations we heard by Helen and Roxana. Also now very important points raised by Sonia. So given that we have limited time, I think I would like to focus on one aspect that perhaps has not been raised as much yet. And that is the issue of criminalization and securitization of Venezuelan immigration in Peru. And I think that is an issue that we really have to take into consideration because it affects the daily lives of migrants and refugees, and it affects their possibility to integrate economically, culturally, and socially in the country. And here I would like to stress that we really have seen a very, very interesting switch, almost a flip in public opinion in a very short period of time. I always say, and sometimes it sounds horrible to say that, no, from or looking at this phenomenon from academia, it is almost a laboratory. It is almost an experiment. So, because so many people have arrived in Peru in such a short period of time that I sometimes say what we have seen in the United States and Europe develop across decades, we have seen in Peru and neighboring countries happen in very few years. So I think it's really important to point out that the initial reaction, not only by policymakers in the region, but also by hosting communities, was extremely positive. There was much talk, and I think many of us will remember in 2017, 18, about the need to protect, about reciprocity, about some sort of historic consciousness or memory that Venezuela had accepted thousands of Peruvians, and now it was their time to protect. And that's really what we saw, I would say, up to mid-2018. I'm a political scientist and we can discuss this, but there certainly was correlation, if not causation, in the timing between the municipal elections in Peru and a change in public opinion, in the public discourse towards mentioning two negative aspects, right? One, competition on the labor market and a decrease in wages, and second, crime, right? And I will focus, now in the minutes I have to talk to you today, I will focus on the latter aspect. To give you some numbers, we have very few, but first I will cite here a study that was conducted by IDEPOC and IOP. If we compare public opinion data, between 2018 and 19, in 2018, 55%, you can say it's low or high, but here I would like to focus on the increase. 55% of respondents agreed with the statement, Peruvian respondents, that many Venezuelans are responsible for criminal activities in Peru. This changed in a couple of months, to the next round of the survey to 81%, who thought the same. At the same time, in 2018, 39% of respondents thought that the majority of Venezuelans were unreliable or dishonest people, and this also increased to 61% a couple of months later. At the same time, mistrust and fear grew from 40 to 68, and from 24 to 52%. Unfortunately, I can tell you that since then, things have only gotten worse. And we do struggle a bit with the fact that we don't have very reliable and updated public opinion data, but with what we do have, we can say that the problem did grow worse. Federico, the representative of UNHCR in Peru, he'll speak to us in a little bit. We're just finishing a report for ACNUR, for UNHCR on this issue. And what we found is that the negative reporting in the media, which of course is closely linked to public opinion. So I always say we have to imagine a triangle, right? We have public opinion that is related to the kind of storytelling narratives in media and related to political discourses, and they all affect each other, right? So it's a triangular relationship between these 3 points. And what we really saw, and it was very interesting, is that while there was a lot of negative reporting, not necessarily the kind of language used or the kind of images that were conveyed in the print media we analyzed, there was certainly an overrepresentation of crimes committed by foreigners and especially by Venezuelans. Until the beginning of 2020, something very interesting we found is that this negative reporting actually subsided a bit during the first year of the COVID crisis, and reporting on crimes committed by foreigners went down. Unfortunately, and that's why I was talking about the municipal election in 2018, where I really saw a first shift. Unfortunately, we now again in Peru find ourselves in the middle of political campaigns because of the presidential election that is coming up in April. And in the last couple of weeks, last 2 months, the topic has exploded once again, both in print media, television, radio, and more than anything, social media. So I'll come back to the media in a second, just to give you a couple of more numbers, to get a feeling for this absolutely skewed public opinion. In the study for UNHCR, we did a recent survey, and we interviewed 1,000 Peruvians, and we asked them what about their perceptions. Interestingly enough, many of them had a very positive idea about migration and cultural diversity in general. Over 80% thought that migration and cultural diversity in general were really positive things, but 70% of them had a very negative opinion about Venezuelan immigration, right? And this was basically due to this misconception once again of migrants, Venezuelan migrants and refugees being responsible for crime. We then asked later on in the survey for the respondents to give us an estimate of the percentage of Venezuelans they thought had been or were involved in criminal activities, and the response was, on average, about 50%. Right? So on average, the 1,000 Peruvians we interviewed think that half of all Venezuelans in Peru are criminals. Now, this is a huge problem. This is a huge problem for the integration of Venezuelans, but also for society at large, right? And it speaks to a greater issue, which is very high levels of distrust in Peruvian society in general, which is not the fault of Venezuelan immigrants and refugees. It's an issue that Peru has been struggling with before. So just to give you the real number, yeah, of course, this has nothing to do with reality, no? And what we did, and again, it's very often very hard to get the relevant data, but together with Oscar Rosales from the data portal enterarse.pu, we had a look at the data, the official data of incarceration, so prisoners, yeah? And what we found is that actually it's only 0.08% of Venezuelans, give or take, based on the data we have from Migraciones, no, Roxana, that are in prison. 0.08% compared to this public perception that it's half of them who are criminals. It is actually 3 times more likely to be in jail if you're Peruvian, because 0.27% of all Peruvians are in jail, right? So I think this is an issue we all really have to take even more seriously and work with, because in another study we conducted from the Universidad del Pacífico, where we conducted more than 100 in-depth interviews with Venezuelan migrants and refugees in 5 Peruvian cities, we found that over 30% of them had experienced criminalization in their daily lives. So while 80% have had experienced some sort of discrimination, for over 30% of them, it was not just some kind of xenophobic slur, it was precisely their criminalization as thieves, murderers, and worse. Yeah. So I think we really can't emphasize this enough. We can't emphasize enough the responsibility of the media. But here, again, something very interesting we found is that it's not that much the traditional print media, although there it depends a little bit on the outlet. And I think international organizations and the state needs to have a conversation with media. The media and the big media houses need to take responsibility. But we have a huge problem, and that is social media. And Roxana, you were referring to, I think some of the videos that we have seen in social media that depict very vividly, the violence that is supposedly or has supposedly been committed by Venezuelans against Peruvians. Now we know, and this research has been done by various institutions and experts, that many of these videos are fake. Yeah, and it is very interesting, and I can't point fingers, and I don't know exactly where those videos come from. And unfortunately, it's something we're seeing across the world, not just in Peru. We've seen it in the United States, we see it in Europe, that in times of political campaigns, these fake news, and these fake videos very often never occurred, right, and were edited or never occurred in Peru, circulate, and generate fear and xenophobia, and this very specific xenophobia, which is criminalization in the public opinion. We also see this kind of.
You have 2 minutes.
Perfect. And we also see these kind of narratives, not just in the media, in the fake news. We also see them, unfortunately, in the discourses of our candidates. And I would go a step further. I would say that this kind of narratives, discourses, fear, has also had very real effects on policy implementation. And here I would like to just briefly mention the militarization of Peru's northern border, and the fact that in various conversations with policymakers who know and say that this militarization makes no sense, because Peru cannot control its borders. It's 7,000 kilometers, I won't say more, compared to 3,000 kilometers between Mexico and the United States. The Trump administration spent more than $15 billion and could not seal off the borders. So very clearly, Peru cannot seal off its borders if it has 7,000 kilometers and very few resources and rainforests and deserts and high mountains in between. So what we're seeing is that these already vulnerable migrants and refugees are being pushed towards irregular crossings, towards trafficking and maybe even smuggling. It's always a translation issue, and maybe even human trafficking networks. My point here is that we will, through this kind of militarization, so my point is we have criminalization of public opinion political narratives, and the media. That leads to a securitization in policies, militarization of borders as an example, that leads to more irregular immigration. And we know, because of decades of studies across the world, that more irregular migrants will lead once again to more criminalization, no, and more fear in the public opinion, based on of course, if they're irregular, you don't know who they are, you have issues of insecurity in the country. So it becomes this vicious circle, right? Where the criminalization of public opinion leads to securitization of policies, which leads to more irregular migration, which leads to more criminalization, which will lead to more securitization. And since I'm running out of time, I will stop here, but I think it's an issue we have to take very seriously. It's an issue we have to fight all together, because it is really something that can undermine any attempts, no, that we collectively as civil society, academia, state and international organizations have been pursuing, right, to facilitate integration. I will stop here. Thank you, Anali.
Muchísimas gracias, Felín. Muy bien. Para continuar con nuestra
Thank you
actividad.
very much, Feline. To continue with our event, we're going to hear from Federico Augusti. He represents the United Nations in their work for refugees in our country. He is a lawyer for migration and public policy in Argentina. He has more than 20 years of experience working with migration from different sectors. And Federico was also a director of international issues for Argentina between 2008 to 2016. Federico, thank you for being here with us. We know the great work you do, and also the work the United Nations are doing for migrants. And our desire today is to ask you, how do you see the situation in our country with migrants and refugees in the context of COVID-19 pandemic? Welcome. Thank you so much, Anali. Thank you, Marta, Feline, all of you that have participated. Sonia, it's a pleasure to be here in this event to continue to set up in the agenda all of what is related to challenges and opportunities. At the end, it's different to say something different than what has already been said. But I've thought about vulnerabilities, solutions, etc. The first thing that I want to say of this situation right now, we have to think about the situation of displacement that we're seeing in the world and the impact, as the superintendent said, the impact that has in South America. And it has happened in a very short period of time. And it's the second biggest displacement in the world that has happened, or at least we have that as formal data. In Colombia, it has been over 1.8 million. In Peru, 1,100,000. Chile, Ecuador, with 500,000 people and 2.8% of its population. If we search for an average in all of the countries in the region, this displacement has come to a 3% increase in population in these countries. And we have to remember the situation that leads them to leave their country. The first is violence and insecurity. In Venezuela, we're talking about the country in Latin America that has the most murders of all the region. This is shown in different reports from international agencies and international organizations. The violation, the civil rights violation, the crimes against humanity that have been recorded in many reports. The last one, we can see it in September 2020, which was prepared by the independent mission to evaluate the civil rights situation, and where we can see all the situations that are happening with the closing of media and the treatment of political a poster. So we're talking about something that we have never seen before in social terms and economic terms. We have to remember that in Venezuela, it's less than $1 what you can get as minimum salary. That means that 96% of the population in Venezuela is in poverty or extreme poverty right now. 96%, that means all of the population of a country that is very rich, probably the second or third party in all of America that is as rich as that. And then we go on to talk about nutrition or the lack thereof. As part of what's happening in that country, as the superintendent mentioned, Peru has made a lot of undertaken a lot of efforts like the PTP, special migration, the system for asylum. And there has been up and downs at the beginning more. And then as time went on, it became more regular. Peru has faced many situations. There's balance in everything. And probably the impact of all of the crisis, political, economic, social, has to do with all those impacts. But I would look at the macro, and the macro is that it's a very large number of people that have been able to access documentation, maybe with a lot of limitations, as Annalie and Sonia mentioned. For example, we have 500,000 that are asking for refugee. We have more than 500,000 that are asking or requesting asylum. But then we have administrative barriers, and we understand that the employers, many of them don't recognize the documents that the government is issuing as relevant or valid. And we are in a country where almost 75% of the population works informally. So the documentation should not have such a large impact in entering formalization. But the most important thing is that efforts are being undertaken. There are regularization programs and measures to deal with the applications for refuge. I think the criminalization has had an impact, immeasurable impact, in the negative perception that people have in relation to Venezuelans that have nothing to do with reality, as Feline mentioned. The perception has nothing to do with reality. And without a doubt, and I'm not going to repeat what Feline mentioned, but media has a responsibility in here. And this is something that we have to address. The videos, the social media are ways of communicating informally, and it's filled with risks. And that could be a topic that we could talk about forever. And the political campaigns make situations worse. 55% of the Venezuelan population indicate that they have felt discriminated against, but 50% tells us that they have a good or very good relationship with Peruvians, so that we have to talk about vulnerabilities. In this monitoring, because it's so recent, I want to mention it. Some 800 families, more than 3,000 people, 20% of the population from Venezuela are pregnant or are lactating. 60% of the households have only one parent as head of household. And remember, this has an impact because we're in a pandemic where you don't have a secure place where to leave your children. There are also many people with critical and chronic health problems. And 2% might sound very little, but 2% are facing, and that means more than 20,000 people are facing domestic violence situations. And that should tell you about the impact of this. Near 90%, and I think Marta mentioned it, are working in the informal market. And if we look at it through the monitoring, 70% of the population is telling us that they earn less than 30 soles a day. So we need to, in this situation, when you're in that situation, your priority is the food for your children. And that it means that 7% has just one meal a day. The quantity and quality of food, 70% is telling us that they're eating less and eating worse. That also has an impact in the payment of rent, the place where they live. And another thing that we should take a look at, 68% tells us that their kids are in school, but half of those people, 50% of those people that are in school, 30% are out of school and they don't have resources for virtual education. That's a very important number. They have difficulty with accessing internet or they don't have the application. So even though they're in school, there's a large number of people that cannot pursue their education because they don't have the tools. Among the opportunities we could see, and we have mentioned this, 57% of the adults have academic university students. That's an enormous amount of people that have capabilities that should be taken advantage of. So many of them are young, between 18 and 34. They're in a very productive phase of their lives. It's something like 3% to 8% of the growth of PBI was because the Venezuelans. We're talking not an 8% of the PBI, but of the growth. And that means that we have a lot of resources that can be channeled. At that moment in the World Bank report, we were talking that the growth of productivity with Venezuelans aboard, it was huge, and we cannot not take advantage of that possibility for productivity. We have some 20,000 professionals in health, teachers, engineers, just to mention some of the professions or professionals that can have an impact in our productivity as a country and in our competitivity. If you don't have your documents, you don't have your civil rights. So the process of regularizing and formalizing these immigrants are absolutely essential. We need migratory mechanisms. We need to deal with the refugees looking for asylum. This could have an impact between them. Some 700,000 people. That is the first step towards integration. Without that, integration is more difficult. The second thing is that we have to visualize the crisis as it is. It is a big situation. It is a gigantic impact. We can't lie about that. This is a crisis that is very important, and it's not receiving the funds that it needs. So we need to get out there and get funds so that we can help the people that need help. Next year and this year, humanitarian assistance is going to be very important. We're going to have to continue to think about food, about housing, about medication, but we have to deal with issues long-term or medium-term, self-employment, entrepreneurship, validation of credentials. This is something that we have to keep working on. And we are working, but we have to continue working on it. Fronteras sensibles. The frontiers are closed. We know it. The frontiers are closed because of the pandemic, and it has to do with health, and we are clear on that. But we also are clear that we're having the worst crisis in the history of the Americas with this displacement. So we have to understand that the measures, whatever measures we take, has a significance. If they cannot exit their country, they're going to die of hunger. So we need to understand that these people that walk 5,000 kilometers are doing it because they don't have an option. Otherwise, they wouldn't be doing that. If they had another option, they would be doing something else. And we have a pandemic where so many people have died. So we have to be sensible in the treatment and in the measures and policies that we use at the frontiers. We need to take care of people with disabilities. We need to have we need to be flexible when we're talking about the people that are trying to enter the country. So we need to do a lot of work on that, and we need to partner with the officers of the government to be effective in this. There are many processes, coordination processes, and we need to make them even better. We have 80 associates in different organizations. We need to work effectively so that we don't duplicate the efforts. And lastly, we need to reopen the asylum system because we have 500,000 people in that system. A lot of people, 500,000 people, have some sort of safety, security. I think this is fundamental, and we have to work with this step by step. We need to provide different mechanisms through technology so that we can get that asylum system working again and fulfill our responsibilities internationally. And I'm going to leave it there, Anali. The report has a lot of information on this topic, so thank you very much. It's a pleasure to hear from you, Federico. All that you have shared is relevant and important. Our friends that have been with us today on YouTube and social media, we are going to close this session. But before, we want to leave some thoughts for you for reflection. Not all of the panelists, all of the panelists have mentioned that we have an issue. This issue is humanitarian, and we have to tend to it, not just locally, but socially, and also through international organizations. We need to be with these people that are migrating and help them. And we cannot forget the potential that this phenomenon is opening the doors to in our country, the information we are gathering. And Marta mentioned some of this information, and the superintendent and Federico, I think we can conclude that there's a potential of human resources capital, human capital, that we should support, that would be a benefit to all of us and to our country. And finally, I would like to conclude saying that we cannot do this job alone. We need to join forces, private sector, organizations, government, people. We all have to work together so that we can disseminate all of this information among all of the people in the country. All of the organizations that supported this session want to say thank you to all of you. We want you to all follow us on social media, and we're going to close this session on opportunities and challenges on the Venezuelan migration to Peru. We hope to see you again in our next session.